Ochsner Baptist, one at Tulane, but even as I was walking out the door, I believe I have an unconfirmed additional people who have been taken to other area hospitals, possibly on the east side. But we will give you as many correct numbers as we can as the day progresses. It is a very tragic situation for me to tell you that we know we have 10 people that this man killed on Bourbon Street. That is why we do not want anyone on Bourbon Street today. Wherever you see yellow tape, please do not violate this tape. This is in order to protect and stabilize the scene. We have information to a certain degree of the demographics of those who are in the hospital right now. We do not know at this point how many could be tourists versus locals, but from the information I have right now, it seems the majority are locals versus tourists. What I also can tell you is that this man, this perpetrator, he fired on our officers from his vehicle when he crashed his vehicle. 2 of our officers have been shot. They are stable, and we will give you an update on them. I have yet been able to go to the hospital. I will be leaving here for us to go visit our officers. We have called in every officer that we have. We have so much appreciated our partnerships who have also offered us staff. Last night, we had over 300 officers out here. And because of the intentional mindset of this perpetrator who went around our barricades in order to conduct this, he was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did. Because of the nature and the indices that we have on the scene, and we have enough information that the FBI will be taking over this investigation. And with that, I am going to be asking, this is the assistant agent in charge. This is Agent Duncan, Special Agent Duncan, and she has taken over this case on behalf of us and the FBI. As always, we will be in partnership with all of our partners, but Agent Duncan, if you want to have a few words for us.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. My name is Alethea Duncan. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge for FBI New Orleans. As Chief Kirkpatrick said, we'll be taking over the investigative lead for this event. This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found, and we are working on confirming if this is a viable device or not. As Chief Kirkpatrick said, we're asking everyone to stay away from Bourbon Street, specifically from Canal Street to St. Anne. That is my ask. Once again, stay away from Bourbon Street, Canal Street, all the way to St. Anne until we can figure out what is going on. Our goal is to provide you additional information at the 11 a.m. press conference. Thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
Yes, I will say that we want our community and our visitors to continue enjoying. There's so much to enjoy about New Orleans, and we are going to make sure that our routes in the Superdome are safe today for the game, and yet we had this tragic event, and we're sorry again to everyone in our community. But we do want you to go about the day, as we say, just stay away from Bourbon, okay?
Can you elaborate on the device? You did say something about the device.
We actually are not going to be taking questions this morning until we have more information.
All right, we've been listening to the New Orleans Police Department update on the tragedy in New Orleans. Right now, I want to go to CBS News reporter Nicole Skanga on the phone. Nicole, what are your sources saying about this attack?
Well, right now, FBI, of course, investigating possible explosive devices at the scene. Federal law enforcement working with local law enforcement down there to really sweep the scene and determine, are there any other incendiary devices, any other improvised explosive explosives as part of this horrific attack. You know, investigators say on the scene that they found what appeared to be an improvised explosive device at the scene of the crash, but they're trying to determine right now whether or not any of those devices were viable. And of course, the FBI has resources. They have, labs in Huntsville nearby, in Quantico. It's likely now that at least some of the evidence from the scene, once documented, will make its way there for investigators to find out a little bit more about the sophistication of this attack, as well as the scope of it. You know, this obviously, a mass casualty attack, whether the suspect here was motivated by ideology, still an open question. We heard there from the FBI that this was not a terrorist event. But of course, over the last decade, vehicles have been used as weapons to target, to kill, to injure pedestrians in cities from, London to New York to Berlin in similar terrorist incidents. So a lot more questions than answers at this point, but FBI rushing to the scene there, what was an already heavily law enforcement secured area with barricades, yet still, at parts a soft target, leading to this horrific attack, and trying to determine again, just the scope of this attack, who might have been behind it, and what the horrific motivations were.
We know that New Year's, there's always heightened security. Was there any particular threat, either in New Orleans or nationwide, that federal authorities were monitoring? Was there a heightened level of threats around New Year's?
There was concern following, the incident that you referenced at the Christmas market in Magdeburg, Germany, where at least 5 people were killed, more than 200 injured after that car plowed into the holiday market. Federal law enforcement always concerned about a copycat attack. And so there had been some, discussion within the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, just a heightened sense of awareness that that incident could trigger another one here in the homeland. But there was no specific or credible, incident that police were aware of, either in New Orleans or even in, places with larger celebrations like New York City. Of course, law enforcement always monitoring these kinds of cities for any sort of disturbance. But we know there was a heightened number of law enforcement who were there on the ground. Of course, this happening in the French Quarter, the heart of the tourism industry, so many people visiting for, New Year's Eve. On top of that, of course, hours before the city is hosting the Sugar Bowl, the football game between the University of Georgia and Notre Dame. So, of course, there were more law enforcement on the ground there, but no specific incident that law enforcement was aware of. But there has been this real heightened sense of alert, and in federal law enforcement bulletins that CBS News has obtained over the past 6 months, over the past year, there is a constant mention of vehicle ramming because, investigators know that this is one of those low barrier mass casualty attack weapons that, access to a car, unfortunately, might incentivize this kind of attack, and it's a difficult attack, to sort of safeguard against. Of course, cities can employ design strategies to try to prevent vehicle ramming. They can consider, more barricades, but there are, of course, trade-offs between securing the cities and designing streets that way, and just the everyday use of public spaces. And of course, the French Quarter, so historic, a place for people to gather, and especially in the new year, one where you want people to be able to move freely and to celebrate.
Nicole Sganga in Washington, thank you. As we look live at New Orleans, the site of this horrific New Year's tragedy, people celebrating new beginnings, optimism at the beginning of the new year, and now the people of New Orleans, the people across America waking up to this tragedy that is unfolding right now in Louisiana. We want to bring in CBS News producer Pat Milton, who covers national security. She's talking with her sources. Pat, what have you learned right now?
We are talking with our law enforcement sources, and they tell us that the situation is extremely fluid. There's many unanswered questions. What is the motive? Were there more people involved here? We don't know the status of the suspect. We don't know if the person is in custody Security or whether they're deceased. We're still trying to determine what the situation is there. As Nicole has said, the FBI is the lead, but they have not yet declared this an official act of terrorism, although this is a terror act. They're still trying to determine that. They've mobilized, FBI and their resources, including the FBI national security agents teams trying to work with partners overseas to see if there's any kind of connection that this person may have had in this horrific event.
Pat, I want to ask also about, you mentioned terror, and we heard the FBI say this is not a terror attack. Can you explain why that terminology, why law enforcement officials are careful about using that terminology when at this point we don't know what the motive is?
Exactly right, and that's what they're trying to determine. They're trying to determine was this an act that was politically motivated? Was it motivated by any kind of ideology? Or was this just a person a lone wolf that decided to commit this horrific event? So they're trying to determine, going into the background of this suspect, going into any connections that he may have had, looking at his any possible social media postings. So they've dug in. They're very careful whether to declare this an act of terrorism. But again, it's an FBI act of terrorism, a federal act of terrorism that they're looking at. Although this is, a terror act, an act on people that have terrorized them.
All right, Pat Milton, thank you. Right now, we want to turn to CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd, a former Department of Homeland Security official in the Biden administration. Sam, thanks for joining us. First off, just your reaction to what's unfolding right now in New Orleans.
Well, this is obviously horrific. Unfortunately, it is relatively unsurprising. I will tell you as a counterterrorism official, the holidays and New Year's Eve are supposed to be a joyous occasion. They are always a cause for concern. That is because a range of bad actors view these high-profile moments, these holidays, as a prime opportunity to inflict damage. We saw that at a Christmas market in Germany just a few weeks ago. We've seen that throughout history, and we're seeing that now. These are high-profile moments in which there are large mass gatherings of people, like, unfortunately, what occurred at Bourbon Street on Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning. So these attacks, perpetrators know, are likely to inflict maximum damage and likely to get a lot of attention. Now, what we have learned over the course of history with these kinds of attacks is there are a range of motivations involved. The biggest terrorism-related threat facing this country now is from what we call lone actors, individuals who are radicalized and mobilized to violence on their own. Authorities are not yet calling this an act of terror, but there are a range of other potential motivations, whether it be criminal in nature, a personal grievance, or another matter. So right now, authorities are trying to stabilize the situation, learn more about the subject or the suspect, including whom this individual may have been in touch with, and most importantly, Michael, to make sure that this is an isolated threat and that there aren't other attacks planned by this individual or co-conspirators to inflict more violence.
And Sam, I want to talk about the suspect because we still haven't heard from local police or federal authorities whether the suspect is in custody, whether the suspect is alive. Why might they not want to release that information at this point?
There are a range of reasons I've encountered working with law enforcement as to why they wouldn't want to release more information on the suspect. In the first instance, they likely have to ascertain if someone in custody was the person who they believe perpetuated the crime. And at this stage, they are likely gathering a range of biographic details, what we call biometric details. If they have a potential suspect, they're running that individual's identity through criminal databases and doing other kinds of searches to see whether this individual at any point rose to the level of law enforcement concern. But again, from a law enforcement perspective, this is incredibly early in an investigation, and it's a balance. Law enforcement wants to inform the public. They want to share whether there are any other associated threats or whether it's been contained, but they want to be certain that they have accurate information to share with the public. So I would expect law enforcement to share more information on the suspect. They have a suspect in the coming hours, but they have to tread very carefully here to make sure they have accurate information. And we've seen similar situations unfold in other instances of violence of this kind.
Sam, you touched on this earlier, but this kind of attack is nothing new. This was New Orleans. It was New Year's Eve. It was Bourbon Street. It was a target that police were aware could be attacked and obviously took precautions. Are there precautions that law enforcement can take to prevent these kinds of attacks where somebody drives into a crowd, and what kind of precautions are taken?
Well, I can tell you that these kinds of attacks are the hardest ones to prevent. If this was, in fact, a lone actor, law enforcement and intelligence officials are working around the clock to try to see whether an individual displays worrying signs about planning an attack on social media and comments to family and otherwise. But preventing a lone wolf attack is one of the hardest things that I encountered in my career, because oftentimes these individuals radicalize and mobilize in private by themselves and don't share information on their aspirations with others. And if they do share information on their aspirations, others are too worried to come forward to law enforcement. So what we need is to build a culture in this country where people reach out to law enforcement at the earliest possible stage when there are concerning signs. From a prevention standpoint as well, likely there were barricades in place at Bourbon Street. There was a large law enforcement presence, but when it's law enforcement and barricades against a vehicle traveling incredibly fast, that is going to err on the side of the perpetrator, unfortunately. So at this point, law enforcement is very aware that vehicular attacks are incredibly difficult to actually stop once they're in motion. And that comes back, Michael, to trying to find perpetrators of attacks well before they actually put their foot on the gas pedal to launch violence of this kind.
All right, Sam Vinograd, thank you for sharing your perspective. Stay with us as we're approaching the top of the hour. I want to get viewers up to speed. We are covering a mass casualty incident overnight in New Orleans. Americans waking up to a New Year's tragedy. At least 10 people were killed when a truck drove into a crowd of New Year's Eve revelers in the city's world-famous French Quarter. Now, this incident began around 3:15 a.m. Central Time. A man driving a pickup drove through barricades at a high rate of speed, hitting multiple people. At least 35 were transported to hospitals with injuries. And then the suspect, according to police, got out of his vehicle and shot 2 officers. They were hit and are in stable condition. And police are calling this an intentional act. We also want to mention that possible explosives were also found nearby. It's unclear right now if they're related to the attack. Now, the FBI is already on the ground and they are taking over the investigation. We want to rejoin Katie Weiss, who has been on the scene all morning. She was there just moments after the attack. Katie, what have you learned?
Morning, I think this morning throughout. I'm hearing a little bit of mixed minus for our folks back in the control room, but I wanted to go and just tell you a little bit about what I saw. I happened to be in the area in the French Quarter just after this happened, and stepped into an area for cover whenever I saw some commotion happening, and I talked with some witnesses who did the very same. One woman even told me that she even heard her husband rather had been clipped by the vehicle that had come plowing through this group of people, this crowd on Bourbon Street, in a very popular area on Bourbon Street. Still hearing something back in the control room, just so for you guys to know.
Katie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to shift gears right now. We are going to join Mary Ellen O'Toole, a former senior FBI criminal profiler. She is now director of the Forensic Science Program at George Mason University in Virginia. Good morning. First off, your reaction to the incident unfolding right now in New Orleans.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, this is a horrifying situation, and the fact that it happened at the time that it did at a location where it occurred really ensured for this offender for maximum lethality. And the reason that I say that is that this is not somebody, regardless of who it is that they identify, this is not somebody that woke up yesterday and decided that they wanted to commit homicide and possibly suicide, and this was how they were going to put it together in such a sensational and lethal way. This took a lot of planning, and it's that in and of itself that will direct law enforcement as to what to look for in the offender's background, because you can't do this in secrecy.
What we're seeing right now, police are characterizing this. This is a quote from police. This person was hell-bent on creating carnage. From what you've seen, the details unfolding in this incident, is that an accurate description of what this attacker was trying to do?
Sure. When you start to break it down, when you have a descriptor like that, you take a look at what was the weapon of choice, how was the weapon utilized. So a large vehicle, presumably a truck, going quite fast, and in an area that was unusually occupied with a lot of people. I mean, I know New Orleans in that area is very popular, but this is New Year's Eve. So you're looking at somebody that wanted the set of circumstances to be such that with his weapons, he was going to be able to create maximum damage. And that becomes important to us to really identify what was going on in his head. Again, the goal was to hurt and kill as many people as possible. Now, this means that they'll bring in the behavioral analysts, which is the unit that I came from in the FBI, and they'll start to look at what was it that contributed to this person's development as he started to plan this. This was not a warm and loving person yesterday. This is somebody that started having these ideas of being extremely vengeful, and oftentimes they're fueled by other events, very possibly by the one in Germany. So this person had a lot of problems in their life, and they were mad and they were angry, and they were going to take it out early this morning. That's the kind of thing that they'll be looking for. Again,